Hello there, and welcome to this session on youth suicide prevention. My name is Brian Dittmeier, he, him pronouns, and I'm joining you from Washington, D.C., where I serve as the Public Policy Director for GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. We're pleased to be with you today at the National Summit on K-12 School Safety and Security. It's an important convening here, bringing together stakeholders across the education space to figure out and identify next steps for how we can build inclusive environments, affirm students, and address the mental health challenges of this next generation. It's a particularly important issue for LGBTQI students. Since my organization was founded in 1990, GLSEN, which started as a network of supportive educators who have worked against a pervasive culture of harassment, bullying, and discrimination targeting and victimizing LGBTQI students, we have worked to elevate solutions and identify those solutions that can help build a safer and more affirming school environment for young students. We work in partnership with the racial, gender, and disability justice spaces. So while many of the statistics and the intervention that I'll lift up in this session is specific to the LGBTQI community, I hope there are broader lessons that you can pull out as you're identifying steps in your own districts about how you can better serve diverse and vulnerable students. Let's start with some of the sobering statistics. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. This is an urgent public health crisis. And unfortunately, the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or CDC, has recognized that those rates have increased in recent years. Since 2000, there's been a 52% increase in suicide rates among youth. How are we not yet tackling this challenge? We know that students have also gone through significant mental health struggle in recent years, given the disruption to both school settings as well as the broader society due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So we must take action to address school climates coming out of this pandemic era in a way where we can build safer and more inclusive environments. We also recognize that in addition to attempted and considered suicide, there's also higher rates of self-harm, with emergency room visits attributed to self-harm increasing in recent years and disproportionately affecting girls. Across both of these adverse mental health outcomes, we see that there are certain vulnerable communities, certain racial and ethnic groups that face higher rates of adverse mental health challenges, most especially Indigenous children, as well as rural communities, individuals with disabilities, and LGBTQI individuals. Our partners at the Trevor Project conducted a youth mental health survey of LGBTQI students last year and identified that 41% of LGBTQI students considered suicide, and more than half of trans students considered suicide. Unfortunately, 14% attempted suicide, with nearly 20% of trans students attempting suicide as well. These rates are significant and warrant intervention to ensure that we can promote a safer environment for LGBTQI young children. So how can schools play a role? First of all, we have to acknowledge that schools are an important intervention and a space where a safe environment can be built for students. But we also must recognize that schools are not in a silo, and students bring their mental health challenges with them as well, and there may be factors affecting them from home environments, their broader community, and even digesting the national discourse. And so schools can play a critical role in creating a safe space and allowing students the opportunity to navigate their own identities, to come to terms with their own identities, and to share their identities with their peers. But that must be promoted from school leadership and imbued across school staff as well. So in order to address school climates, we must understand first the perceptions of youth about whether they feel safe in school. Every couple of years, GLSEN conducts a national school climate survey. In 2021, we surveyed over 22,000 LGBTQI students. And what we identified is that 83% of those students did not feel safe in their school environment. And so as educators, as school administrators, as school mental health professionals, let us take a look inward and identify how we can build a stronger environment. First, we must address the policies that are in place in schools. First and foremost, among LGBTQI students, 59% identified that they faced LGBTQI-specific discriminatory policies or practices in their schools. We see high rates of students being discouraged from living their authentic identity. About 25%, 1 in 4 students, have been penalized for public displays of affection when their cisgender and straight colleagues have not been. We see that the majority of trans students are suppressed from living authentically, whether it's the 52% of trans students who are not allowed to use their chosen name or pronouns in classroom settings, or the nearly 3 in 5 students who are trans students who are not allowed to use the restroom or other facilities like locker rooms that are associated and consistent with their gender identity. So there's a lot that can be done at the school level to address policies and promote a more inclusive environment that affirms LGBTQ students in their identities. Secondly, we must boost supports for LGBTQI students. And what we see is that the overwhelming majority, over 80% of LGBTQ students, want to access mental health services. But the majority, 56%, cannot access mental health services even though they want to. And so we have to figure out, how do we build trust within school settings where students feel comfortable coming forward to school mental health professionals? And how do we ensure that that is an inclusive environment where students will feel affirmed? First and foremost, we must be careful about the interplay between any student coming to a school mental health professional or even an educator and that school staff then notifying a family. This is a disturbing trend that's come up in school policies recently that has an adverse outcome and puts LGBTQ youth at risk. First and foremost, there are households where a student's identity may not be accepted. And if parental rejection occurs, of course, there are significant rates of adverse mental health outcomes coming from that, but it can also put a student at significant risk of homelessness and being kicked out of the home as well. And third and foremost, we must listen to LGBTQI students. And unfortunately, what we hear is that school staff is not always receptive to an LGBTQI student reporting challenges with their school environment. Of LGBTQI students who have come forward with concerns or complaints about harassment, bullying, or even physical assault in schools, 60%, 3 in 5, were not supported at all by school staff, and school staff either ignored or told them not to do anything. An additional 16% told them that school staff actually told the LGBTQI students to change their own behavior. A common refrain that we hear is, quote unquote, dial it back a bit. And then 7% of LGBTQI students were they themselves disciplined after reporting harassment, bullying, or physical assault. And so these are statistics that need to be reversed. We need to be thinking about, how do we as educators, whenever a student comes to us, how can we build that trust and how can we support them? And so over the years, after not just multiple surveys of LGBTQ youth, but also significant research in the space, GLSEN has identified an evidence-based model that demonstrates how we can build an inclusive school environment, build trust between students, their peers and their teachers and other school staff, and impact the mental health challenges that LGBTQI youth face. If this intervention is implemented, we see that there are lower rates of considered and attempted suicide among LGBTQ youth, lower rates of anxiety and depression, and higher rates of self-esteem, self-confidence, and school belonging. And that's the trajectory that we hope to see schools move in, because addressing these mental health challenges has an impact not just, of course, in saving lives and building confidence among youth, but it also has an impact on educational outcomes by reducing rates of absenteeism, improving GPA and academic performance, and improving the likelihood of students pursuing post-secondary education. And so when we think as educators and when we think as school officials and school staff, this is both a mental health challenge, but it is also an academic and education challenge. And when we think of how do we set up the next generation for success, it takes this two-pronged strategy of addressing both the academic performance and the mental health challenges to ensure that students are prepared for what is beyond K-12 education and set up for a lifetime of success. So let's walk through our 4 supports model. I'll highlight all 4 supports and then go into further detail. So first and foremost, we need to develop supportive educators. Secondly, we need to adopt comprehensive policies that protect LGBTQI students from victimization and bullying. Third, we need to adopt inclusive curriculum. And fourth, we need to identify and foster safe student-led spaces, particularly through gender sexuality alliances or gay-straight alliances, commonly known as GSAs. So number 1, develop supportive educators. This is a critical piece in assuring that we can build trust between students and staff. Now, there are 2 ways that we can develop supportive educators. First and foremost, we can hire and recruit and retain diverse educators who reflect the student body. And that, of course, may go a bit beyond the K-12 setting and talk about the broader education space, but really investing in a pipeline of diverse teachers and bringing them into K-12 settings is so critical so that students have an example and they see someone in their community that they can trust and identify with. Secondly, cultural competency trainings can play a critical role in developing supportive educators. And this is a piece that, of course, cuts across our intersectional movement and can be applicable to developing cultural competency among different racial and ethnic groups, different religions, and students with disabilities as well. But when we think of cultural competency trainings, one of the sad pieces is that so few schools actually adopt that for LGBTQI issues and train up teachers, school mental health professionals, and other school staff on how to approach LGBTQI issues in this ever-changing environment. California is a good example of a state where actually it is starting to move towards requiring those trainings, but there's no need to wait for state action because school districts and individual schools can start offering these LGBTQI cultural competency trainings and ensuring that educators are prepared to meet the needs of an ever-growing and diverse student body. This is also particularly important because we identified in our National School Climate Survey that nearly 1 in 5 LGBTQI students were actually restricted from sharing in school, either in a classroom assignment or an extracurricular activity, anything related to an LGBTQI issue. And so as we're thinking about how do we build a more inclusive environment, not only is building a supportive educator environment important, but also allowing students to express themselves in class and feel that they can express their identity in class as well is important to improving youth mental health outcomes. Secondly, comprehensive policies, particularly those that address victimization and bullying. When it comes to preventing youth suicide, we see that in-person and online victimization can play a pronounced role in influencing a student's decision. Students who are victimized in person are 3 times more likely to attempt or consider suicide, and students that experience online victimization are similarly 3 times as likely to consider or attempt suicide. And so addressing these challenges is significant, and school policies play a critical role. As we discussed earlier, it's both a matter of creating an environment where students understand that they are protected by school policy against LGBTQI victimization, as well as that they feel comfortable coming forward and filing a complaint, and that action will actually be taken. Most significantly, many schools are preparing for the forthcoming updates to federal updates to Title IX, where the U.S. Department of Education has indicated that they are likely to specifically flag that sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics for intersex students is covered and included in Title IX. Included as well, we expect, is gender expression, which does not necessarily have to be associated with an LGBTQ identity, but is also a significant piece of how LGBTQ students are singled out for discipline across school settings. We see nearly 1 in 5 students are disciplined for wearing clothes that are not consistent with their gender identity. And so there is room to improve there. When Title IX updates are put in place, and even before, if school districts are ambitious enough, policies can be adjusted, and it is important that policies be adjusted to specifically enumerate that LGBTQI individuals are protected against harassment and discrimination. We have seen in our National School Climate Survey that when sexual orientation, gender identity are included in an anti-bullying or harassment policy, it not only reduces the rates of bullying and reduces the adverse mental health outcomes, but it also improves peer support and particularly peer intervention, where students who are not necessarily of the LGBTQI individual will display allyship and help stand up against bullying and harassment. And so there's an important role for school policies to be updated and to be adopted more broadly so that anyone receiving a complaint follows through on it and stands up for the victimized and bullied LGBTQI student. Our third support is inclusive curriculum. And this is a critical step to making sure that LGBTQI students feel seen and represented in their coursework. And so we are seeing a number of states, a number of districts increasingly weave in not just LGBTQI issues, but issues of other diverse communities, including, again, racial and ethnic groups, different religious groups, individuals with disabilities, and weaving that into what is taught in the classroom. This is particularly important for history and civics, as well as English literature and language arts. But in the LGBTQI context, carries a pretty specific connotation for health and sexual education. What we know is that LGBTQI students often lack access to LGBTQI specific information, and including it in the curriculum can, again, change lives and support mental health outcomes by boosting confidence and self-esteem, as well as addressing issues like anxiety, depression, and considered and attempted suicide. Even if a school district does not necessarily include LGBTQI issues in classroom instruction, there are still ways to ensure that there is inclusive resources across the school district. Textbooks can include passages that single out and highlight LGBTQI history or contributions across society without it necessarily being taught. And what we unfortunately see is that only about 16% of LGBTQI students have access to textbooks or assigned readings that mention the LGBTQ community in a positive light. Additionally, resources in school libraries that students can access on their own time can help build knowledge. And again, I demonstrate that there is inclusion and that students are a part of the community, even among the LGBTQI community. And so making sure that resources are available to students is particularly important. I would say, as we're noting the critical importance of resources available in schools, that as school districts are navigating challenges to certain resources that may be available in schools, the American Library Association has some pretty specific guidance out there that says that any challenged material should remain in circulation while a transparent hearing process is considered. And so it's really incumbent on us as educators, as library resource staff, to be mindful that any challenge resource should be available, and that we should be working proactively to build diverse collections so that all students feel that they are heard and represented in the school setting. And the fourth and final core support is student-led groups, or GSAs. And this is particularly important to my earlier point of how do we build peer buy-in to protect and support LGBTQI individuals while also working to reduce instances of harassment, bullying, and in-person assault. And so what we are seeing is that GSAs can play a critical role in building both the peer acceptance of LGBTQI students, reducing bullying and harassment, and improving peer intervention so that any harassed or bullied students have support from both their peers as well as ideally from their educators. What we are seeing trends in the GSA space is that, of course, GSA, as with any other student-led club, is subject to the Equal Access Act. And so schools cannot work to suppress a GSA without suppressing other student programming. And so that's an important protection that school districts should have in mind and work to be in compliance with, so that we ensure that GSAs are treated just like any other student club and available to students more broadly. These four core supports, when taken together, play a critical role in changing and moving the needle on inclusion in the school environment. By working to develop and foster supportive educators and school staff, adopting comprehensive policies that explicitly protect LGBTQI students, including LGBTQI students and issues in the curriculum and resources available, and creating safe student-led spaces, we can build an environment that recognizes LGBTQ students, affirms their identities, and helps build their confidence and self-esteem. All of this is an important intervention to ensure that we are addressing adverse mental health outcomes well before attempted or considered suicide, and that we are building a healthier environment for students to learn in so that they can grow and thrive and proceed beyond K-12 education, so that they can ideally pursue post-secondary education and contribute in new and different ways to the evolving tapestry of the American society. We at GLSEN are here as a resource to you. We want to work hand in hand with school districts to ensure that you are supported in your work in building inclusive school environments. So I want to point you to a couple resources and ensure that you have my information so that we can be in touch. First and foremost, I want to ensure that you have access to GLSEN's 2021 National School Climate Survey. This is as I mentioned at the top of the call, this is a comprehensive survey of over 22,000 LGBTQI students with significant insights well beyond what I was able to share today about how students perceive their school environments and how some of these four core supports specifically impact how students feel about their school and are willing to attend their school, and most importantly, how they feel about themselves as well. Secondly, I want to direct you to maps.glsen.org. This is the GLSEN Navigator page, and it has specific information about state-by-state trends so that you are better informed about where your state is on some of the interventions that we shared today, as well as some of the policies that you may be navigating at the school district level and in individual schools. And then finally, I just want to offer my personal support. My name is Brian Dittmeier. My contact information is Brian, B-R-I-A-N, at GLSEN, GLSEN.org. So please never hesitate to reach out with any questions, any concerns, and we are here to support you in your work as we all stand together to ensure that we are fostering an inclusive environment and looking out for the health and well-being of the next generation. So thank you for the opportunity for us to speak and share some information today, and we wish you the best of luck in moving forward through the next couple of years to build a stronger school environment.